Sandy Willette.
And I am Nancy Marie,
Co-chairs of Beyond the Mask Committee to evaluate scholarly doctoral projects.
Next deadline for work to be considered to present on Beyond the Mask is October 1.
Please complete the one-page application found on Beyond the Mask webpage to be considered.
We look forward to working with you.
Today's episode of Beyond the Mask is presented by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. Get a free consultation today to be guided through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Just visit crnafinancialplanning.com. And don't forget, listening to our podcast can earn you Class B credits. For more information on how you can submit them, check out the CE Credit tab on our website, beyondthemaskpodcast.com. Welcome to Beyond the Mask, innovation and opportunities for CRNAs and advanced practice nurses, with certified financial planner Jeremy Stanley and CRNA Sharon Pierce. Jeremy Stanley has worked with CRNAs for more than 23 years, and Sharon Pierce is a former president of the AANA and the NCANA. Join us as we leave the operating room and learn the latest in the CRNA and advanced practice nurse industries. Beyond the Mask starts in 10, 9, 8,
7. Hey Sharon, what's happening?
Oh, good morning. Is it still morning? No, it's good afternoon.
It's after 2 o'clock.
I know.
That means it's closer to 5 o'clock somewhere.
Ah, yes.
Let's see, what time is it? I just got back from Australia, so we were 14 hours. So it's actually 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Do you feel like it's 3 o'clock in the morning?
I'm still trying to recuperate. I am not going to bed at 3 and 5 anymore, but there are times throughout the day I feel like I should be somewhere else. You know what I mean? It's just,
right.
It's an innate, but I am getting up at 6 now. So, I've made some progress. Yesterday I was up at 4. So, it's just,
you're going in the right direction. Well, I'll not call you on the way to work at 5 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah. Don't call me anytime soon, 'cause I'm still trying to figure it all out. But, anyway, well, it's good to be back with you. Good to see you. And we've got a great guest that you've been chasing around for a while. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners know this guest because he's been around for a while. Not to say that he's old or anything, 'cause he's not, but he's been around in the CRNA community and made a big splash. And I've always been impressed with this guy, even though I hadn't had a lot of interaction with him, because he's a CRNA who's a business guy, and I that's kind of my jam. So, Sharon, since you've chased him for so long to get him to do this, why don't you do the introduction? And this is going to be part of our Courage to Lead series.
I am excited to do so. And actually, when you say I've chased him around for 5 years trying to get him on the podcast, actually, I've been chasing Paul longer than I have been chasing you, Jeremy, because I have known Paul since we served on public relations together. And let's see, you were the liaison from GRC to PR, and there's been many miles that we have walked together, many bottles.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, many bottles of wine we've consumed together. And you knew me when I had no wrinkles and my hair was blonde, not white. And so lots of stories can be told here, but maybe we shouldn't do it on air. But anyway, we're so glad you're here with us, Paul. And I will also, I don't think Jeremy knows this, but the first year that I served on the AANA Board of Directors, Paul was my president.
Does Paul have a last name, Sharon? Because you still haven't introduced him
yes,
yet, but...
Paul Santoro from the great state of Michigan. So anyway, Paul, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, the year you were president, and what you've been doing since you were president?
Okay. Thanks, Siri. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I apologize. I was so difficult to corral in really participating in this really highly successful series. But I was president of the AANA from 2010 to 2011. And that was really, every AANA president will say so. It was a unique time in history and all of that. But I think it was a unique time in our history in that, right? We were just wrapping up the legislation related to the Affordable Care Act. We were still doing rule promulgation, published No Harm Found in Health Affairs, cost-effective analysis of anesthesia providers in nursing economics. There was just a lot of things that were going on in the country, as well as in the AANA at that time. Since finishing in 2011, in 2015, over the course of about 25 years, I built and then sold an anesthesia practice management company called Anesthesia Staffing Consultants. So I did that in 2015. We sold to a national private equity-backed firm. And I'm pretty sure that was the only 100% owned anesthesia practice management group that sold to private equity. There's been others that have been partners, right? A lot of them are mutual friends, highly respected people. But I think that was really the only one that was 100% owned and operated by CRNAs that sold to PE. So that was interesting. I did that in 2015 and worked with that company for about a year and a half, and then took a couple of years off. And about 5 years ago, I got a call from the CEO of North American Partners in Anesthesia, and they wanted somebody who was familiar with clinical operations to get involved in revenue cycle management. And for the last 5 years, I've been with NAPA, and I currently am in charge of what we call the front end of revenue cycle, everything that from the time a case is closed until the time a charge is posted, including management of our offshore coding partners in India, the Philippines, that kind of stuff. And I do that for 1.9 million cases a year. And so that's we're just finishing up a sort of a digital transformation and, moving off of two legacy platforms, consolidating onto one more modern platform. And so I do a lot of stuff with fighting insurance companies and technology and trying to make things more efficient. And I am really entirely out of clinical operations, although I'm sort of the RCM liaison to the clinicians because I can speak both languages.
Well, you make sure they get paid.
It's in everyone's best interest that they get paid.
Yes.
I think that's a fair statement.
So I think what you do is very important.
Right? And the insurance companies aren't making it easier these days.
No,
right? They like to make my life miserable. But
yeah. Wow. Well, it's a great, interesting story, and private equity in the CRNA world. Of course, there's there have been a lot of talk about this. I mean, in my world, private equity is every day. In the CRNA world, it hasn't been as much. So, at some other time, I'll pick your brain about that because I know you've got other things to talk about. But I do find that very interesting, and would love to do that at another point in time. So tell us, Paul, during this interesting time that you were AANA president, what was going on at that time?
Well, going back to probably 2001, we first had the federal physician supervision requirement under Part A of Medicare, right? That was lifted under the Clinton administration as part of an executive order, along with a whole host of other rather infamous things, which we won't get into.
Paul, there was a lot of things lifted under the Clinton administration. I mean, no pun intended.
That's
but,
true.
Skirts.
But anyways, Tommy Thompson, who was the secretary of HHS at that time, said, look, we need some quality data. And, we always knew that was going to be part of the equation. And really, I think starting around 2004 was really when the work started in earnest on the development of the No Harm Found publication in Health Affairs, which I don't know that there's ever been by anybody a more powerful article in a more prestigious journal on the quality of care that's delivered by CRNAs. I think that is the number one quality article out there. So anyways,
it's still quoted. We still use that data.
Yeah. So after that was published in August, I believe. And so for the prior 4 years, I basically had served as an advisory capacity. There were a lot of parallels between that study design and practice management and that kind of stuff, as well as with the one in nursing economics. So anyways, we had 2 articles that we were armed with. There was a few others which probably weren't so prominent, but we were going to spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. Some people call it the elimination of a national, they call it a national opt-out. It's not really a national opt-out, but it's the elimination of physician supervision under Part A of Medicare. And so that was really going to be a major focus for us. We hired a firm called Glover Park Group. It's a huge political influence lobbying firm. They became famous for their work, I think, in the 90s when Toyota had some really bad car accidents that were rear-ended that resulted in big fires and deaths of individuals, including children. And they managed that. It was sort of like their claim to fame. We hired that group as well as some other consulting firms in DC. And I thought we put together a really pretty sophisticated campaign on how we were going to work with the Obama administration. And we were very excited that we had the level of access to the White House that we did under the Obama administration. Sort of interesting side story. I mean, I met with Kathleen Sebelius, the Secretary of HHS, twice. One time I was personally invited to have lunch in her office, which was pretty exciting, along with some other nursing leaders. And I actually went to the holiday party at the White House at the invitation of the President and the First Lady.
Wow.
So we had really unprecedented access to the White House and the staff and all of the major legislative committees in both the House and the Senate. But we really were going to pursue that. We had a lot of meetings, and it had been probably a 5-year plan for me before, because I was on the board from 2000 to 2002. Took 5 years off. I think that's the limit that you could run for president again without going back to a regional director. And so I ran at that time. So I had a 5-year plan, and then I had the 4-year while on the executive committee to plan for this. So I basically I felt, and I think it's tough to argue that was a really important time in our history. And so I plan to take work off that year and just dedicate myself to that. Obviously, I would still be involved in running my company, and I hired great people, so I didn't have to be there on a day-to-day basis. But I had an interest. I was a partner in a small 4-seater Columbia aircraft, which is a little hot rod, and I had a real deal pilot as a partner. He flew in Vietnam. He flew over Kosovo. He flew for Eastern. He flew for Trump, and I used to fly from Troy, Michigan, right into University of Maryland. I'd have a car pick me up, and I would be on the Hill all day. I was there on a weekly basis, meeting with from energy and commerce to health and human services, you name it. Every regulatory agency that touched healthcare, I probably met at that time, and it was a really interesting yet eye-opening experience. That despite all of that sort of goodwill, the bottom line was that nobody in federal office was willing to stick their neck out and eliminate physician supervision under Part A, as long as the governors had an ability to opt out of it. And they're like, why do I want to have all of that hassle? And so it was an interesting and frustrating experience. And Glover Park Group had developed this really intensive and expensive, I'll call it campaign, I guess is the right word, after we started to sort of get shut down on things. And I pulled the plug on it. I'm like, it's not going to happen. And the dynamics are not right here. But it was still, I think for the first time we set it to, I'm sure with social media the way it's used now, getting picked up by social media channels or press channels is a lot easier than it was back then. But we had unprecedented press coverage in the Hill as well as outside the Hill, all over.
Well,
So,
make no mistake, those relationships that you started back then has benefited us for many years in the future since then. I mean, it's hard to believe that's 13 years ago, but those relationships, there are still some of those relationships in play now that
yeah.
came from that beginning. And I do remember your little hot rod plane because whenever we would be in Illinois working at headquarters, and then you and I would take a car to go to the airport, and you got dropped off at the hot rod while I had to go and get on a commercial flight.
At the executive terminal. Yeah.
Yes, I remember that.
That was fun, like flying in and out of O'Hare or Atlanta in a 4-seater prop plane when you're on the runway with jets was an entirely crazy experience. Like, I can hear you, but I can't see you. We're down here.
Like the little ants.
But it was fun. Frank Purcell at that time, he said, well, we're not used to this kind of access to the president. I'm like, yeah, you're stuck with me. I took the year off to do this.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Well, let's talk about you also hired our executive director that we had at that time, and you undertook a restructuring of the finance department, which, you know, I have never been a spreadsheet kind of girl, and you would have to help me as a brand new board member. And this is second nature to you, but why don't you talk about that just a little bit?
Well, in 2007, I was elected treasurer, and I had, since the late 90s, run my own practice, run my own business, and I had at least a working knowledge of financial statements. And although I wouldn't call myself a financial expert, there were certain things that didn't look right, and the numbers weren't adding up, and we were probably had unreasonable expenses in certain areas and not the proper financial controls. And, you know, and so starting in 2007, I really became suspicious, and things grew and grew and grew, and eventually resulted in a transition where we hired Wanda, and we had an assessment done on the finance department, and the report basically came back and said, there's not one person that's qualified for the position that they've been hired for in your finance department. That is an eye-opening experience. And these are things, obviously, we were conducting. Probably to date was the largest strategic campaign, maybe, with the exception of in the late 80s, early 90s with direct reimbursement by Medicare. But absent that, I don't recall a larger, more strategically important campaign. And, so we're spending tons of money, and our books are not in order. Our reporting was not good. And, it was kind of funny because I think I got elected in part because of my business credentials. And I'm the only president that I'm aware of that got up in front of the members and told them point blank, I don't trust our books. And
Remember that?
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. It's like, you gotta call them like you see them. And so that was pretty interesting. But I think Wanda did a good job in restructuring and putting, competent people in place and all of that. So it was all of the events, including hiring John Gard as an interim, right? There was a termination of the executive directors, they called them at that time, right? Then we hired John Gard, who passed away, 9 months later?
Right. And then
right?
Jackie was
Jackie took over, right? And so there was just a lot of leadership transition that was going on at that time, and hiring somebody that was well-known to the members, to the staff, I think helped settle that situation down at a very important time. But it was disconcerting not really knowing our financial performance. And one of the things I remember is sort of related to that when it comes to So like making good financial decisions. But we used to pay I think up until 2009, we paid our PAC administrative expense out of member contributions rather than dues. And anybody who's been involved at PACs at either the state level or the national level knows that's a freebie. You never take candidate money and pay for your administrative expenses if you don't have to, right? You get to make sure that money gets to where it's supposed to go and cover your administrative expenses through the organization, which is entirely legal.
I remember too, we found out that our lawyer had billed us $39,000 to come to our annual meeting, and we had paid him to come to our annual meeting.
Oh, that reminds me of another transition of an icon. And Gene Blumenreich retired when I was president. Right? Sort of he's a what's the member category that?
An honorary member. He's an honorary
member. There's only a handful of them, right? And so Gene Blumenreich got that, and then he retired that year. we were looking for ways to reduce our expenses by such things that you're talking about.
Yes. Well, there are many more things that we could go into, but probably don't have time for. But I can remember every single board meeting, Wanda would say, I've uncovered something else that we would need to deal with.
Yeah. It was the proverbial onion. Right?
It was.
There. Yeah. No question. And at the same time, I mean, it wasn't like we were just trying to keep our heads above water and focus on the operational issues, because we had these other major strategic initiatives. And so we were walking and chewing gum for sure. We were multitasking.
Today's show is brought to you by the folks at CRNA Financial Planning, an independent consulting firm that offers financial planning services exclusively to CRNAs and their families. From planning for a child's future college expenses to building a predictable income stream in retirement, the firm is committed to offering you comprehensive financial services, customized to fit your unique needs and objectives. If you have questions about your financial future, get them answered. Call the team at 855-304-3748. That's 855-304-3748. Or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
Well, let's talk about another strategic issue that is still alive and well today and was started under your tenure, was the 50-state service strategy. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So, it's kind of funny that 10 years later, people were still talking about that. Conceptually, the idea was that, right, first of all, strategy, the execution of strategy is based on two things: the development of strategy, which requires you to have local knowledge, right? You can't develop a straight strategy from Chicago, right? It doesn't work very well. You have to know all the local stuff. But in order to execute, right, you need resources. And the way nurse anesthesia organizations are put together, right, most of the resources, the expertise, are really centralized at the national level. So the idea was, what data can we collect? What analysis can we perform? What key performance indicators, what metrics can we develop so that we can have the necessary match of strategy, right, opportunity, and resource allocation so that we can chalk up more wins and in measurable wins, right? And that's part of the business mindset as well, is and I always just is like, advocacy is a great thing, but are we really moving the needle, right? Are we changing the situation at all? And deciding what change we want, how we're going to measure it, and all of that is important. And so that was part of the conversation, really the genesis of it, that concept of the 50-state service strategy. It was how can the National Association partner with the state associations to, whether they wanted an opt-out or if they were fighting AA legislation, whatever it was, how can we partner with them in order to best execute a win and measure those wins, count them. I've always been an advocate of not just a one-time study, not an academic exercise, but actually is a key performance indicator for the AANA is on the percentage of QZ claims that are submitted, as opposed to whatever medical direction, medical supervision, or anything like that. Because to me, that is a good way to measure the needle, right? It's a reflection of our education, our quality, our acceptance in the community if we're growing the number of QZ cases. Now, I can tell you that qualitatively, anecdotally, I can tell you that more and more and more cases are done every year, QZ, that don't have medical direction. But we don't measure that as like a key performance indicator. I think there was a study once in 2017 or 2018 that said, yeah, it went up. But that's the difference between like sort of an academic study and development of a key performance indicator that you look at all the time. Right? Now, I don't know the cost that would have been associated with that. I don't think it would be astronomical. And I also think it would be very powerful from an advocacy and PR perspective. Right? That would be a really powerful metric. But that's the sort of thing in development of a heat map on where the opportunities were, where we had the fires. And we also had a lot of challenges with our state associations, whether there was your financial viability, whether there were governance issues, those sorts of things that you could incorporate into your KPIs in a heat map. As an example, there were some issues where this was my president-elect year, but Jim and I visited the state of California, and at a particularly important period in time, and it was right before the California opt-out. I was speaking at the California Association as president when Schwarzenegger signed the opt-out, which was a really cool moment. We had a nice celebration that night. And but Jim and I were intervening with the state level because they had some governance issues and some political type things that they were working through, and we facilitated. We kept the wheels on the bus so we could get over the finish line with the opt-out, and so that was a good thing. But there was just so many moving parts. But that was really the idea behind the 50-state service strategy was how can we best partner with the states to make us all more effective. And in retrospect, the thing that I'm perhaps wish had stuck but didn't was really the utilization of KPIs around strategy. I mean, we can say we advocate, but are we moving the needle and how are we going to measure that? That was really at the heart of it. And I'd like to see us now. We do business intelligence that is pretty standard ASAE type stuff, where, what's the percentage of the membership? What's, how many PAC dollars, foundation dollars per member, all that kind of stuff. We do those kind of metrics, but those metrics are around the business of anesthesia, which are important, right? I'm not minimizing the importance of that, but the value of our members, right? That's related to the execution of the strategy. Mm-hmm. And we don't have KPIs around that.
Well, it was a very busy board, and I don't know if once I jog your memory, you may remember this, but out of this 50-state service strategy came the genesis where AANA paid for all 50 states to have, we had a specialist that worked with each state, assess them, assess their governance, assess their finances, because we had a couple of states that their executive director had scammed them out of their monies, if you remember. So there were not checks and balances at some of the state levels. So we are the only national association that has ever conducted something like this, unless somebody else has done it since then. So that came out of your genesis of the 50-state service strategy.
Yeah.
Did you remember that?
I remember it now. I remember it now.
You jogged his memory a little bit.
Because
that's it. I was a neophyte.
The whole sort of organizational health concept is
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. In 1993, that tells you how old I am. I did I was president of Michigan, and it was the first time I ever did an organizational assessment for the state of Michigan. And that led directly to us hiring professional association management and things like that. So that concept, that idea had been with me for a long time.
Wow. Well,
I'm an infrastructure freak when it comes to businesses. Sort of my orientation.
Yeah.
And
those are
if
good things.
people who are listening this have not figured this out, he is a strategic thinker. I think I remember the speaker at your fall assembly was big thinky head guy. I can't remember his name.
Oh,
yes.
Big Think Strategy.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
What is his name? I'm embarrassed that I can't remember his name. Yeah. But Big Think Strategy. And we had Simon Sinek. No, it was Simon Sinek.
Yeah, that was at my meeting.
It was at your meeting?
Mm-hmm. But I remember,
I'll Google it here.
They mapped all of us on the board with Herman brain dominance, and you were all the way off the chart in yellow and strategic thinking, and I was all the way diametrically opposed to you in organizational types. You and I were both ends of the spectrum totally. And so what I used to tell Paul is, you may have all these big ideas, but you need me to implement them because I'm the organization person.
That's right. You need balance. So Big Think Strategy was Bernd Schmidt.
That's it.
Yep. I wrote that book, Big Think Strategy. I've done lots of lectures based on my really strong belief in a lot of the concepts that he presented there. And you remember, Sharon, I know you remember this. So one of his stories was about in the Trojan Wars back in whatever ancient Greek days, right? When they all hid in the Trojan horse, went in, slept on all that. That was one of his, let's come up with an idea that is asymmetrical, that's nobody's done before, whatever. And so we had little pins for all the committee members.
That's right. I do remember that.
We used to, the AANA had a lot of traditions, and things like pins and crystal and all that were part of all of that. So.
Yes, actually, if I would unblur my background, you could see the gift that you gave all of our board was the vase, and
that's right, from Pewabic Pottery in Detroit, all handmade. Yep.
I still have mine. So we digress. All right, Jeremy, I'm going to let you ask a question now.
I appreciate that. I'm just sitting here listening to you two, like two little girls drinking a bottle of wine somewhere. Paul, something else interesting happened during your time, and that is the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010 as well. And I guess my take on it would be, none of us knew at that time what this really meant. I'd be interested from your viewpoint, what you thought it would have meant back then, because obviously I think it was a big deal for CRNAs that it got passed, and has it manifested itself like you thought it would, or did it take a different turn?
So there's one of the best things that one of the best provisions that we fought for in the Affordable Care Act was the non-discrimination provisions, provider non-discrimination. But it wasn't that I didn't appreciate it then, but it was very poignant at the time, is that what shows up in legislation and what shows up in the rules are two different things. And unless you really get stringent language in the rules, right? And rule promulgation can take years,
right,
after the legislation. And then sort of the backbone, the political backbone to enforce those rules, the legislation doesn't matter as much. It's nice. I mean, and it still exists today, but we see insurance companies that will deny QZ. There's fewer than there used to be, but there are some, especially on the East Coast. It's more of an East Coast, Southeast phenomenon, but it still exists. Or that, what recently happened with Cigna as well as a lot of other commercial insurances where they took reimbursement down from 100 to 85%. Now, some CRNAs will still have contracts and they're getting paid 100% for QZ, but their policy now is to pay at 85%. You could make the argument that that's still good. It's a heck of a lot better than Medicare where you get 100%, but it's a lot less dollars, right?
Yeah.
But so that was, I thought, a really important thing, even if it maybe didn't work out in the final analysis the way that I had hoped. The other major provisions there was like high tech in there where we were supposed to standardize the rules around billing and the transfer of information for EMRs and all of that. That, especially since the last 5 years I've been involved in the revenue cycle, there is such a myriad of billing rules. It's absolutely insane. And trying to get that straight or to actually bill for medical direction when it occurs adds, I am sure, tens of millions, if not like hundreds of millions of dollars in administrative expense to healthcare today. And I had hoped, right, that we'd be able to streamline that. EMRs would talk to each other, right? If I had an adverse reaction at one hospital, I wouldn't have to worry about it, being excluded from my records just because I went to another one. But yeah, we still have all those problems. So the Affordable Care Act was good. And maybe I should call out some of the good things about it. I think the emphasis on primary and preventative care was good, right? There were certain things that were overturned by the courts, including mandatory coverage. I can argue both sides of mandatory coverage, but I think that the Affordable Care Act definitely led to more people being covered through Medicaid and exchange programs, and that is a good thing. Including, even though in the U.S. our maternal child health statistics are still not that good compared to most developed countries, I'm sure that without the level of coverage that that population has, it'd be worse. So, I think it did some good things. I naturally remember those things that I'm more chagrined about.
Attention nurse anesthetists, are you ready to take the first step toward being your own boss? Well, join us for a deep dive into the world of 1099 work with the upcoming workshop, Understanding the 1099 Landscape for CRNAs. Discover the key differences between W-2, PRN, and 1099 work, and equip yourself with essential knowledge, tools, and real-life case studies to make a confident switch to 1099. Not only will you earn up to 5.75 Class A CE credits, but you'll also have the opportunity to learn from the industry's finest, Jeremy Stanley, Sharon Pierce, and more seasoned experts. Plus, enjoy the vibrant sun and golden beaches of Fort Lauderdale while you're at it. This event, approved by the American Association of Nurse Anesthesiology, is set for October 19th at the luxurious Marriott Harbor Beach Resort and Spa. Register now and take the first step toward being your own boss and potentially unlock higher earning potential as a 1099 employee. You can register right now at 1099workshop.aana.com. We'll also link to that in the description of today's show. This is an event not to be missed. We'll see you in Fort Lauderdale.
Well, it's interesting because, at the time, I thought, well, more people have access, meaning more surgeries, more opportunities for CRNAs. And I think that definitely has manifested itself. And I think, even on top of that for CRNAs, the aging population, we tend to need a little bit more maintenance as we get older. So there are things like that have kind of set themselves up to make the Affordable Care Act a good thing for the CRNA community. And hopefully some of the other things that, we hope that worked its way through that maybe not have manifested itself yet. Maybe one day it will.
Well, I'd like to point out about the regulatory piece of it, and that's still the piece that we keep getting our butts kicked on, even to this day, is a lack of control in the regulatory arena. So, and
a lot of people think that because you pass legislation that like the battle is done,
done.
and it really that's just the beginning of it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there were several other key reports that came out during your time. The CARE report, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah,
That was pretty innovative stuff.
Yeah, that was the Commission on Anesthesia Economics and Reimbursement. And the association had traditionally been, understandably, more focused on education and advocacy and things like that, and really didn't get that involved in reimbursement. But there were people, like Larry Hornsby and Juan and others that had started to become more active and better known in the association. And we had a commission put together to make recommendations. And I think that came out, 2009, 2010. But it made a bunch of recommendations, especially around the engagement of commercial carriers, because we had always focused, whether it's part of our advocacy, right? We always talked about Medicare, but anybody who has run a practice knows that really you float the boat on commercial carriers, on commercial payers, and where payment's going to be 3 to 4 times as high, maybe more, depending where you live. So there was we had great people. We had Michael Hash, who was former CMS director. We had one other, his name escapes me, Tom, can't remember. But so we had 2 CMS directors on there. We had, it was a really pretty prestigious group. I don't remember all the people that were on it, but it was a good thing. Naturally, better follow through on some of those recommendations, I think would have had us in a better position. Now we're really, the commercial carriers like United Healthcare, Cigna, Aetna, they are so big and powerful. It's difficult to get their attention. And that's a years long process to sort of like get in front of them. Outside of AHIP, which is the Association of Health Insurance Plans, that's where we've always engaged commercials. I just don't think that that's necessarily the best forum for it. But it was an important piece of work. It was a body of work that was really important to me personally, just because I was in the business of creating CRNA jobs, and that obviously was very important. The other really big report that I was involved with was the Cultural Assessment Task Force, which was not that long ago. I don't know, 6-7 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, Jackie chaired that task force for you, I believe.
Yeah, she was on it. I was the principal maker of the resolution.
Oh, yes, I remember that business meeting.
Yes, I was the principal pot stir. And then when the board put it together, they wanted somebody that they thought could keep me reined in.
Would that be Jackie?
So that's they knew Jackie and I were friends, and I had tremendous respect for her, and she's a very strong, bright individual. So that all worked out good. But I think that the CATF report really brought out some engagement gaps and made some good recommendations. I would like to see further follow-up on that. I don't think we need to spend $250,000 every 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, pick a number. I think that follow-up on that could actually be done much less expensively. But yet, again, talking about sort of strategic association KPIs, in my mind, that's one of them, is the sort of member engagement using the CATF as really sort of the seminal work for the development of those KPIs. I think that would be a great thing.
I think there's been a thread of that running through, because we know that we're losing members who have been out less than 5 years. And I think a thread of that original report runs through some of the initiatives that they have been using to look at that and why we're losing some membership. I'd like to comment too on the CARE report. And it was during my year we had the reimbursement summit. I think you helped me out with that because I resurrected that care report 4 years later, and we had a reimbursement summit. But I think, as far as I know, that is all kind of wound down at this particular point.
Right.
So there was one other report that came out during your tenure, if I need to jog your memory
Please
again.
do.
Terry Wicks and Tony
That's right.
Chippis chaired a committee or a task force for you. Why don't you elaborate on that one? Because it's certainly affected lots of people afterwards, including myself.
Yeah. So it became clear that, number one, we probably were not having a diverse enough representation of the membership, right? It was mostly academicians who had an easier time of getting time off, or frankly, successful business owners like Larry, like myself,
Like you.
right? That could take time away and devote it to the association. And then, so that was one aspect of it and we received minimal, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was either minimal or nothing as far as stipends from the association.
Right. I think a regional director got $2,000 for 2 years, and that didn't even cover any of your time off, anything.
Yeah, that barely cover your paper or computer, right? But then in addition to that, there was a big part of it, and I know Tony did some additional research on this, but really the toll that leadership took on the members, and right, rather famously, and still fresh in my memory, is Jan Stewart. And Jan and I dated for 2 years prior to her death, and so she and I were close. And I saw this happen to her, but I also saw it happen to a lot of other people. Is you go from 150 miles an hour being the AANA president, travel around, going to all these high power meetings and all that. And there's sort of I would say the creation of a false sense of celebrity almost. And then, as John would say, right, chicken today, feathers tomorrow. And many of our past presidents or past leaders lapsed into serious depression afterwards. And that's no joke. I'm not going to name names, but there's a lot of people that'll tell you, yeah, that happened to me. And so we were concerned about the health of our leadership. And so Tony and Terry did a great job in really spearheading that initiative. But one of the biggest things was, at least I think the president year was going to be the average. I don't know what the methodology is today, but at that time, I think the recommendation was that it was going to be the average CRNA salary. And although the PE year was substantially less, it was still significant. And all of it across the board was very much greater than what had ever done before. And I think it was embraced by not only the leaders, but the membership in general, because yes, it increased the sort of diversity. It allowed people, those solo practitioners that maybe could participate, or it lessened the financial burden on people so that we could have more interest in people running for leadership or participating in leadership. So that was a really important body of work. Thanks for bringing that.
You leveled the playing field for people to be able to run and serve in office.
Yeah. And it just, like, the vast majority of our members are sort of, we have 2% in academia, right? I mean, I remember like 8% were, these numbers could be a little off, but they're close. Like 8% were involved in businesses. So the vast majority of our members were clinicians working in the OR every day. And for them to take that time off without some sort of compensation, I mean, they're already donating their time and their effort. But for them to, it would just seem to make sense to me to get that representation into how we run the association, and helping them out financially was a key component of that.
All right, Jeremy, I'm going to let you have another question.
Well, I'm not sure how much time Paul's got. We can continue on here. So
I think I might have a 3 o'clock actually. Let me
Well, I do want to bring up one more thing, and this was kind of a negative piece that cost you a lot of heartache, and it was whenever NBCRNA came out with the recredentialing and what that was going to look like, and it was the start of some tumultuous times for us that culminated during my year.
Yeah.
So, and I know that sometimes when you're president, you may make decisions that members don't necessarily agree with or understand. And even some of your colleagues who have been president before. So, if you would like to elaborate on that.
Well, I think that the AANA always had this culture of we should control the COA and should control the NBCRNA. And if you looked at the affiliation agreements, right, it was like we were compelling them to buy services from us. We had leased employee agreements where, they would pay us for people, but they'd be on our payroll. We meaning the AANA, carried sort of like the liabilities associated with pension, with employer lawsuits, with things like that. And right, we had I don't remember what all the accrediting bodies are, but basically the accrediting bodies for the COA and the NBCRNA, they would say that they had to be independent. So there was always this conflict. And honestly, the level of service that we provided in many cases to those organizations was not of the quality, and I might be in the minority of this opinion, was not of the quality that I would have wanted us to deliver. I mean, if somebody's paying us for a service, it should be a high quality service. We don't muck up your taxes. We don't forget to do stuff. Right. I'm not privy to all the details on how the NBCRNA exited. I think there's enough blame to go around for everyone on that. But I'll tell you this story, because I had a great working relationship with both of those associations. Frank Gerbasi I've known forever because he used to be program director at University of Michigan Flint, right? Obviously in Michigan. And I used to teach his students, work at that hospital where he was at. And then Karen Plaus, who at that time was Zaglianici, came out of Wayne State and Henry Ford Hospital. And I knew her from Ford Hospital. So I had very good working relationships with both of them. And I'll never forget, after dinner one time with the NBCRNA board, Karen and I are walking ahead of the group and we're just chit-chatting. And I was like, because at that time we used to take, I think it was $15 per recertified member and give it to the NBCRNA. And then they would knock that off of the recertification fees for the members. And one of the big things, if you remember my report at mid-year, was all of the money we were giving to our organizational affiliates. That goes back to the PAC discussion as well. But anyways, so we were giving hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to the NBCRNA. And I said, Karen, what is this? I said, we're giving you all this money. I said, we're strapped over here. And she's laughing. She said, Paul, it's a member benefit. I said, Karen, where I come from, we call that a subsidy, and we shouldn't be subsidizing your operations. Their next board meeting, they voted to not have us do that. It was no formal anything. It was just Karen and I walking down the street after dinner one day.
Yeah. Well, there's one other thing you did during your year, and then I swear, I think this is even all that I remember. You hired a CRNA to go into the DC office.
Yes, I did. A friend, one of, I think, the best executives that the AANA has ever turned down, and that's Christine Zambricki. And I have, and continue to this day, have tremendous admiration for her. She's a class act. She knows her stuff. She knows how to network. She knows how to play big hospital politics. And I think that she was a real asset improving operations and communications with the DC office. She was, full transparency, Christine and I used to sit on the soccer fields together and watch our daughters play. So just sort of another Michigan connection, but I knew her very well, and it was a pleasure. Plus, she chaired the search committee for the executive director.
So what value did you think having a CRNA in the DC office brought to our organization?
I think that, so there's two components. One, for effective advocacy. One is that you have to have all the political connections. That's why we got the staff there, and they came up in the committee structure in DC and all that. The other is you need a subject matter expert. And when it comes to anesthesia, when it comes to workforce, when it comes to those kinds of things, and Christine, coming out of Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak, they had been perennially in one of the top 5 surgical hospitals in the entire country. They did more Blue Cross Blue Shield than anybody in the entire country. And so she was a great person to talk about to legislators about workforce issues, about reimbursement, things like that, because she actually dealt with it for decades, really, at a very high level. And so I think that her being a subject matter expert in that regard was important.
I remember she is the one who developed our close relationship with the FTC.
Yeah.
That still
remains. Well, and that's,
today.
I mean, we could say that for another day. But also, whether it was in Alabama, there were several important points where, there were going to be actions either taken by the Board of Medicine or by the commercial carriers in the states that we had the FTC step in on. And Christine was certainly part of that. And I'm glad you mentioned that. It's such a multifaceted and story that goes over decades to put it all together. But yeah, that's really important.
Yeah. Well, Paul, as we kind of wrap this up, because I know you and Sharon could probably continue this for the next few hours here, and you need to get back to your day. But yeah. we do.
I'm going to break out a bottle of wine if we keep talking, because that's
I know
with Sharon.
Well, as we kind of wrap it up, and are there any leadership lessons that maybe you'd like to impart to our listeners as we kind of get this one wrapped up, or anything else that comes to your mind?
I think today, this exists in the general political world, whatever society, but it also occurs in the AANA, is there's a lot of negativity and divisiveness. And I think that we're all best served recognizing the fact that there may be differences of opinion, other differences, but that really we're still in this together, and unifying messages are better than divisive messages. That would be what I would close on.
Well, I think we need that not only in the anesthesia community, but pretty much all throughout the United States, and especially in political environments right now. But no, I think it's a great thing to close on. And Paul, thank you for your time. I know that you and Sharon have always had a good relationship and been friends and worked together and know each other a lot. And I think that what this series is about is everything that you embody, leadership. I hear the passion in your voice. You brought so much to the table to the CRNA community, and it's different than what other CRNAs bring. each one of you bring a different skill set in. And I just watch this as an outsider, what Sharon's strong suit is a little different for you, and what you are is a little different from her. And, the way you guys interact and are able to relate to one another with your laid back type B personalities, and, nobody wants to be in charge. And, it really does, and I know behind closed doors, there's things that are said and done, but I think one theme that continues throughout this for me is that you all, and I've not talked to one CRNA doing this that didn't have the best interest of the membership and the individual CRNA sitting at the head of that bed giving an anesthetic at heart. And everything that you talked about today, just fits into that continued path that we're on here. And so, we just want to thank you for being on. Thank you for all your leadership. Thank you for all you've done for nurse anesthesia. I think it's done a lot for you as well. So I know you're appreciative of that. And, we just hope that somebody listening to this can kind of embody some of those things that you've done and carry the torch forward from here.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to be with you both.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, I think it's a wrap.
I think so.
Well, Sharon, if they like our show and they want to help us grow, how can they help us grow?
Well, the best way to help us to grow is to leave us a review, but make it
positive. We all know there's way too much negativity in this world, as Paul just said.
Absolutely. Tell all your friends, share us on social media. We're in the top 50 medical podcasts in the country on the way to number
1, just like we are in the CRNA community, right, Sharon?
Yes, we are. Until the next time.
It's a wrap.
Beyond the Mask is made possible by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. With almost 2 decades of experience, the firm guides CRNAs through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Schedule a free consultation today by calling 855-304-3748 or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
Hi, this is Jackie Rolls, President of the International Federation of Nurse Anesthetists and President and founder of Our Hearts, Your Hands, a global anesthesia support community that takes donations to allow nurse anesthetists in low and middle income countries to go to educational programs, buy equipment, or textbooks. Your donations are tax deductible, and we would appreciate your support.
Be sure to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere you like to listen to shows. Also be sure to check out BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. Each episode is posted there with a corresponding blog post, and we timestamp important parts of the episode to help you quickly get to the content you're looking for. Also check out the special series section on the site. You can follow along and catch up on the CRNA History Series, episodes specifically about political conversations in the industry. Or try the CRNA Personal Finance Series. It's all on BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And if you have a question for the show or want to be a guest, or even suggest a particular topic, fill out the contact form on the site or send an email directly to us at info@BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And lastly, let's take the conversation social. Check out our Beyond the Mask podcast Facebook page and Facebook group.